everything, and I'm going to record. Great. Well, again, good afternoon, everyone. Thank you for being on time, and thank you again for being flexible and having class meet online today. I really do appreciate it. I know that it is not ideal, but it is helping us keep forward and cover some exciting things, which is what we have in store today. We're going to talk about salamanders, and I decided I'm going to do my dinosaur lecture today, better known as the more aptly known as the prehistoric reptiles lecture. So we got a few things to cover today. In advance of class today, you were revising your primary lit assignment number 2 and finishing up your reflection on our data analysis from the lizard experiment we did in class today. So I will look at those soon and get those back to you. But today's agenda looks like this. I have a herpetology in the news segment for you. Athena is going to talk a bit about salamanders. And then I'm going to give you primary lit assignment number 3. Since you had 2 due today, I figured that you wouldn't want any break while you had that momentum going and you just want to get assignment 3 going right away. So looking out for you. And then I'm going to finish up class today talking about the age of reptiles and lots of different prehistoric reptiles. And finally, I've just got a few reminders for you on the way out. So that's the agenda for today. Before we get into any of this, let me just pause and see if anyone has questions for me. Okay, before we get into this, I have just a quick announcement / question of a rather personal nature. But I'm planning on being in France for 2 months this summer, continuing some of my lizard research. And we are looking for potentially a student to house sit for us. So basically you'd get to live in our house for free in exchange, well, not for free, in exchange for looking after our kitties and our turtles. I put some pictures of especially Potato being very cute here just to entice you. We're going to be gone for most of the months of June and July. So if you or anyone you know is looking for basically free housing in Delaware for the summer, please let me know as soon as possible or have them contact me just via email is the easiest thing. All right, let's get on to herpetology. So in your quiz on Wednesday, there was a question about the relationship between morphology, performance, and fitness. That's actually based on a real study. And this study came out 3 or 4 years ago and actually got a bit of traction in the popular press because the researchers very creatively used leaf blowers to simulate a hurricane. And you can see a still image from one of their experiments here. The takeaway message here is that this set of observations and experiments illustrated how hurricanes in islands in the Caribbean can exhibit strong selective pressures on lizard morphology. So what these lizard researchers did is they caught a whole bunch of Anolis lizards on 2 species of Anolis lizard on islands in the Caribbean, and they measured all these different aspects of their morphology, then they released them. Well, they had planned actually to do a different experiment where they were going to see how these lizards changed as rats were eradicated from these islands, rats being an invasive and very destructive introduced predator. But fortunately / unfortunately, well, really unfortunately, a hurricane hit like 6 weeks later. And then they went back and they said, hey, this is a great natural experiment, a good example of researchers thinking creatively, thinking on their feet. They went back right away and they re-caught all the lizards we could and measured everything that they could. And they found that the factors that influenced the lizard's ability to survive were its leg lengths and its toe pad size. And they found that these were important for survival. And you can see on the picture here that the size of the toe pad is going to help the lizard cling to vegetation when winds blow really strongly. But they found that was really interesting, though, was that actually having longer front limbs was good. So the lizards with longer front limbs survive better. Again, probably to get better grip, to be able to hold around bigger pieces of vegetation with greater strength. But that lizards with longer hind limbs actually fared worse, that having longer hind limbs was detrimental. And they weren't sure how to explain this, so they did an experiment with a leaf blower, and they tested this, and they actually found that the way lizards cling to vegetation is very much like this. So having these big toe pads to cling, having these longer, stronger front arms is good to cling. But if your back legs are long, they actually act as kind of a sail or like a kite, and they pick up the wind And so if your back legs are bigger, it produces more, the wind will produce more force against the body of the lizard, thus leading them to be blown off, presumably into the ocean where they'll die. So very cool experiment. And I want to, I have the video I was going to play in class for you today, but instead I have a very short video clip here. What I'm going to do is advance this slide here. And what I'm going to do is, instead of playing this over Zoom, I'm going to post the link to this video in the chat. And it's about 2 minutes long. So go ahead right now and take 2 minutes to watch that video, and then we'll reconvene in 2 minutes. Okay, I think that's about enough time to watch the video. It's kind of cool to see the video of actually the lizards getting blown by the leaf blower and how they actually, you know, what strategy they use to try to hang on. Before we move on, any questions, comments, thoughts on that?
I have a question.
Yes, please, Chase.
So did they just test it on like this dowel rod thing, or did they test it like on the ground? Because like my question would be like, is there any, like, yes, they cling and they like live in trees and stuff, but they're also on the ground as well. So did they test anything like that or no?
Good question. I don't think they did, but I'd have to go back to the original paper. But what I can say, what's interesting about these anoles and these islands and other islands is they're kind of famous for the way that they partition their habitat, meaning that there's some species of anole that live only on the ground. There's some that only live like on the trunks of trees. There's some that only live up in the canopies. And so if you're one of these species that live only like on the trunk or in the canopy, you're really not going to be on the ground very much. And even if they're, you know, facing this challenge of the wind or anything like that, they're not going to necessarily try to escape to the ground. They're going to stay up in these branches. Also of note, and again, I don't know exactly what they did in the experiment, Chase, but part of what happened on these islands is that they got flooded. And so lizards that were on the ground would have got wiped out for sure. So the refuge was actually in the trees, but to be in the trees, you had to be able to hang on for in these hurricane force winds. So. Yeah, and I provided links to the video I just showed, as well as a Popular Science article and the original papers in the program for Wednesday. So I'll have to double check exactly if they did that on the ground, but I'm thinking that they didn't. Good.
I have questions, two questions as well.
Yeah, go. McKenna, go ahead. You got 2 questions.
Okay, so first up, I wanted to see did they change out like the dowel rods with ones that were of like different, I guess, circumferences to test whether they could cling better or worse to those?
That is a great question. I'd have to go back and look at the original study. I'm not sure how they decided on a dowel size, but it would certainly be important.
Okay. And then the other question I had is, did they have anything to kind of cushion the anoles landings if they were not able to cling on?
That I do know. And so they had like a net. You couldn't see it in the video. I was actually thinking that watching the video that I wish they had shown that, because it looks kind of terrible. Like, all right, see you later, lizard. They had like a netting setup, so the lizards would just blow into that and they were fine. Yeah.
Okay, gotcha.
Yeah. Otherwise, it'd be pretty irresponsible. I would have to agree with you on that one.
Thank you.
Yeah, of course. Other questions? All right, and just a reminder that you can expect to see questions on your upcoming quizzes and exams on the herpetology in the news that we cover, with a direct relevance to our morphology performance unit. All right, next up, as you know, last week, it would have been 2 weeks ago today, or was it last week today? I can't remember time anymore. We visited the Crocs Preserve to see our ongoing study of the red-backed salamander. And today, as kind of a follow-up to that, Athena, who's been involved with this project for more than a year now, is going to share a bit with us about the research and what we're doing and what her role is in studying these salamanders. So I'm going to hand things over to Athena. I'm going to stop sharing my screen. And Athena, I made you a co-host. You should be able to share your screen.
Yeah, let me do that. One second.
And I'm going to spotlight you in this recording for everyone.
Hang on, Zoom is like needing my access granted.
Is that something I can do from here? Or is that something? Yeah, you're a co-host, so you can do anything you want. You can cancel class right now if you wanted to, Athena. That's all in your hands.
I'm thinking about it.
Yeah, don't do that.
Yeah, every time I try to share it, I have to like allow Zoom. But it's like
Bear
not.
with us for a second, everybody. We'll figure this out shortly.
Yeah. Like I'm in my settings for like security and privacy, and it's just not like allow Zoom to do it.
Okay, here's what we could do. Quick solution. Why don't you send me the presentation and I'll put it up on my screen and share my screen, and then you can just tell me when to advance slides.
Perfect.
Great. All right, everyone, just give us 1 second to set this up, if you would.
I sent it.
Okay. Just via email.
Yeah, I shared it.
Perfect. Yep. And Athena, is it better to show it from Google or from PowerPoint, or does it not matter?
Well, it doesn't matter, just in the slideshow. It's probably fine.
Okay. There we go. And there we are. Cool. All right, we're good to go.
Cool. So a couple of weeks ago, we went out to Kraus. You guys trekked through the mud. We finally got to our Coverboard Arrays. So we had previously done, usually when we go out, we do both of the plots and take thermal images of under each board, but we just focused on plot 1 when we went out. And so we're looking for those eastern redback salamanders. That's the Plethodon cinereus. Alyssa is the one that initially started working with Dr. Gangloff, but I kind of tagged along, and then we recruited Jenna. And next slide. So kind of like our overview of the goals. So we kind of just want to characterize and see how they're using their environment, their little microhabitat. They are a bioindicator species, so it's useful. It could help us predict things with climate change and how they move around. So it's part of SparkNet, just Salamander Population and Adaptation Research Collaboration Network. And we've also been working with OSU, and they're focused on the drivers of the population dynamics, and it's across the Northeast, the range of the salamanders. So trying to figure out how climate variation is altering their activity patterns is one of our main goals. It's kind of a long-term project, so we don't have a ton of results right now, but it's just building the foundation for the future studies. So to do this, we have 50 boards in each array, and we have 6 arrays. So 2 of those arrays are at Kraus in Delaware, and then the others are at John Belt's, and that's in Galena. So when we go out, we collect environmental data, soil samples to try to see like the moisture and how that's relating to all of our measurements and data that we collect. And so we raise the cover board and we put a frame in, and then that little frame is what we take using the thermal imaging camera, we take a picture of it, and you can kind of see just like the environment, and if there's a salamander, how cold it is relative to what we're looking at in the soil. And so you've never seen this picture before, but that's what it looks like. Somebody's holding a salamander, and then the orange is like the warmth, and the purple, like the darker purple, is cooler temperatures. So when we take these images, later we'll analyze them and extract the data, and like you can extract the number of pixels in each of those, and that'll, like, we have a whole spreadsheet going with that. And then we also take cloacal temperatures. Dr. Gangloff specifically, he's like an expert at this. And the one result that we have found is that handling, as soon as we flip the board over and get the salamander, handling rapidly elevates their temperature. So if it takes too long to stick it in their cloaca, we throw out that data. So yeah, as you can see, Dr. Gangloff is an expert. Yeah, and it varies. So obviously if it's on a warmer day, like the salamander is going to be a little warmer, or if it's too cold, they may just be totally underground and we don't get to see them out. And that
This is
kind of
definitely
happens.
one of, sorry,
What?
Athena. Yeah, I was going to just say this is definitely one of my favorite non-transferable skills here.
Yeah, it's amazing. I'm impressed. So every time we find a salamander or several, in some cases, under the boards, we bag them up, get all their information, which board they're under. And then at the end, we do all the measurements, get their snout vent length. And we have a little black light flashlight that we can check to see if they're a recapture. And if they're a new capture, then we inject them with elastomer, and each salamander has a unique code, so we can follow them over a long period of time. Because so far, all of the elastomer has still been underneath their skin. It's unclear how long it actually lasts, but so far so good. And we can see, like, it's pretty cool to find when we went out the last time, some of the females that we had captured previously were now had eggs. So it's kind of interesting to watch their life and see how they progress. So yeah, there's a cool little salamander on the left, and that's kind of what on the right is what you look at when you're looking underneath of a board through the thermal imaging camera. So thank you. If you guys have any questions or anything, I'd be happy to talk about it another time.
All right. Thanks so much, Athena. Let's give Athena a round of applause for a great presentation overviewing the project. And I saw in your reflections as a class on this outing is that some of you did have more specific questions about like what the project was and what the goals were. So I think I wanted to make sure that you had those questions answered. So what else? What other questions do you have for Athena? I think SK, go ahead. Athena, I'm just going to leave you in the hot seat, okay?
So you mentioned that sometimes on colder days, they won't really emerge. So you'll get like fewer or maybe none. Do you just throw away that data set because there are none, or do you sort of like, do you include that in your analysis?
We include everything. So every time we analyze every single image, whether or not there's a salamander in it or not. Repeating myself. So if there is a salamander, then we get like a separate set of data from that salamander. Like you can like do a little oval tool in the program and like get the number of pixels just for that salamander. But if there isn't, then we're still getting the full like soil square.
Good question. Thanks, SK. Other questions? All right. Well, if you have any more, you know who the expert is. Go ahead and ask Athena, and she'd be happy to talk about the project more in depth. We have a couple more outings still this spring to collect some data on our little salamanders, and I'm glad that it worked out that the class got to see that firsthand. Got to see some of the important techniques like the thermal imaging and the implant of the what's called visible implant elastomer, the VIE tags. All right, great. Well, let's keep things moving. I'm going to go back to, let's see here. I'm going to do this, and then I'm going to share my screen again. And there is a little salamander. Go back here. Okay. So next step for today's class, I want to introduce primary literature assignment number 3. And so this, you're very familiar with the format of the assignment. This is going to be the third and final iteration of this assignment. It is due by our last class on Monday, April 25th. So that's 2 weeks from today. And these are notes. These are actually the same notes that I shared with you when I gave primary lit assignment number 2. I'm keeping them on here because they're still relevant. Remember that the paper should be recent, so since 2015. If you find a really great paper that's from 2014 and you think it could be good, just let me know. If you're interested in submitting this to the Herpetological Review for publication, it should be even more recent, so from either 2022 or 2021. And your first step, like the last time, is to find a paper and get me to approve it. And that form is available. The primary lit assignment is available in Blackboard. and you'll find a link to the form there. All the form asks you to do is to submit a citation for the paper and then a link so I can find it. The goal here is just for me to make sure that the papers that you're selecting are appropriate for this class assignment. I'll give you the go ahead and then you can have at it. Now, importantly, you'll see in small words up here that your topic should be on something related to reptile cognition or social behavior. I'd even accept behavior more generally, but what we're going to look at for our last kind of topic in class is how reptiles were traditionally thought of as kind of dim-witted, not intelligent animal, but recent research has really flipped that paradigm on its head. And in fact, you have a few readings to do for Wednesday's class in conjunction with this. And on Wednesday, we're going to talk about play and what play is as a behavior and talk about examples of play behavior in reptiles and amphibians. So again, you have primary literature assignment number number 3. The first step is due Wednesday, and that's a simple form in Google to allow me to make sure your paper is appropriate. And then the final draft, or the draft you submit, is going to be due on the 25th of April. And I see a hand here. Ethan, go ahead.
Yeah, can we do amphibian cognition or social behavior as well, or just reptiles?
Oh no, absolutely. Amphibian is great. Yep. And I apologize if I wasn't clear about that. I know I kind of focused a little bit on reptiles there, but amphibians are 100% okay and encouraged. Yeah, glad you asked that. Thank you. Any other questions about that assignment? Okay, so this is actually a good time. We're going to spend the rest of the class talking about the age of reptiles. And this is a lecture that I've given previously. I modified it a little bit for our purposes here. And this is something that I originally intended to do at the beginning of the semester, but like all things, it seems this semester we're a little bit, things take longer than I think, even when I know that they're going to take longer than I think. So what I'll do is I'll start the lecture here. And then we'll take a short break in a little bit, and then we'll come back and I'll finish it up. We should have just enough time to finish this today in a reasonable amount of time. And so I titled this lecture, The Age of Reptiles, and I will focus on reptiles here. There's tons of cool stuff we could talk about with amphibians and prehistoric amphibians. Those of you that have taken vertebrate anatomy, so Mason, Michaela, you guys know this well. There's some really cool stuff with amphibians. I'm just going to focus on reptiles today. Part of the reason being is that they're kind of the most famous of the prehistoric vertebrates, really, right? So why am I calling this the Age of Reptiles? And in other words, what are you going to learn from today's lecture? The first thing is that there was a truly fantastic diversity of reptiles on the planet for a very, very long time. So we've been talking so much in this class about living species and living organisms, and the great diversity of those living organisms that are here with us today. Well, I'm here today to tell you that there was even greater diversity in the past, and they dominated all of the Earth's ecosystems. Now, what's important is that in doing this, they filled a variety of ecological niches, and they possessed a lot of different adaptations to fill those niches that we don't normally associate with reptiles. And in fact, that maybe reptiles today don't demonstrate as much. So for example, many of these were endothermic. Many of these were, they had feathers. Even the non-avian, well, I'll talk about that, but you'll see that the dinosaurs that weren't birds had feathers. They exhibited extensive parental care and social networks. Now, there are some reptiles today, most certainly, that exhibit parental care, but by and large, that's not kind of that's not terribly common. And finally, I want to show you the evolutionary relationship among both extinct and extant reptiles to help us understand how many of today's creatures came to be, and specifically birds. And so we're going to look at the relationship between these now extinct groups and modern day groups of reptiles. Before I get into this, a few disclaimers. The first is that I'm not an expert. I'm not a paleontologist. And so I put this together based on my own reading and knowledge. I kind of love this stuff, so I read about it all the time. But this isn't my area of study per se. And that's important because this is a super active area of research. This has been called like the Renaissance or the golden age of dinosaur studies the past decade or so because all kinds of crazy cool discoveries have been made recently. Also, this is a superficial overview, superficial. Is that a term? Do I need to say it twice, or if I just say it? It's a very superficial overview of only reptiles. There's lots of cool extinct amphibians. I mentioned this earlier. And I'm going to show you some images. Of course, we don't have any actual photographs of these organisms, but at least to the best of my knowledge, the representations that I'll show you are kind of plausible representations of what these animals could have looked like. So in some cases, we actually do know what, for example, color different dinosaur feathers were, different color their skin was, or at least we have some rough idea of what the pattern was. In other cases, we don't. So we don't know for sure that these animals looked like this, but based on our present knowledge, these are pretty reasonable guesses for what they might look like. All right. So I see a hand here from Chase. Go ahead, Chase.
So are the images that you're going to present, are those based on like fossil records that we have, and from there they created like a photo or like an image that best represents it, or is this like kind of based on that, kind of based on other things?
Most of the images are what I would call artist renderings based on our scientific knowledge. And so they take what we do know about the animals, which in many, many cases is only the bone structure. And then based on that, maybe based on some other evidence, for example, if there's fossilized feathers or skin, and then other evidence, for example, what other organisms they're most closely related to, or what we know about their behavior and how that might inform their appearance. And they'll take all those things and put it together in and create like a reasonable likeness, right? And so we don't know for sure that it's correct, but as far as we know, it's not incorrect, if that makes sense. That's a good question, Chase. Does that answer your question?
Yeah, thank you.
Cool. All right, guys, you know that I can't start a lecture like this without a phylogeny. Here we go. So let me unpack this for you. Let's see. Yeah, we're gonna blow this thing up. Okay. So you'll notice some familiar clades on this phylogeny, specifically your squamates here. That includes lizards and snakes. Now, I broke lizards into two groups in this phylogeny, the scleroglossum lizards and the iguanian lizards. I didn't get into this division earlier in the semester because it's a little bit uncertain and controversial even, but basically we can think of two major groups of squamates, one that includes snakes and amphisbaenians and skinks and monitor lizards, and another group that includes iguanas, chameleons, and other lizards there. The important takeaway message here is that these are all squamates. Of course, sister to the squamates, we have our tuatara, rhynchocephalia. And if we combine squamates and rhynchocephalia, then we get what's called the lepidosaurs. I think I may have mentioned that term kind of offhandedly earlier in the semester, but I do want you to know that lepidosaurs is the group that includes squamates and tuatara, and some other cool extinct guys that you're going to meet in just a minute. Then we have the other, I guess the other half of our dinosaur phylogeny includes turtles, right? Which are the sister group to the archosaurs. Archosaurs, of course, include the currently extant groups of crocodilians and birds that you see here. Now, I added to this tree three other groups of dinosaurs that include sauropods, theropods, and ornithischian dinosaurs. And I'll talk about those groups in a little bit. The takeaway message here is that sauropods are big, generally they're dinosaurs. They're really big dinosaurs that moved on four legs and had long necks and legs. So think of Apatosaurus, Bronchiosaurus. These guys are sauropods, Diplodocus, those guys. Theropods is the group, of course, that includes Tyrannosaurus rex, Allosaurus, etc. And ornithischians is another group that includes like stegosaurs and ankylosaurs, etc. And you'll meet these guys in just a moment. The takeaway message from here, though, is that notice that within archosaurs, we have this group called dinosaurs. That is the archosaurs excluding our crocodilians over here, right? So if we have all the archosaurs, we get rid of the crocs, then we have a monophyletic clade called the dinosaurs. Notice, super importantly, that the birds that are extant right now, living birds, are nested within dinosaurs. So it's actually not true that all dinosaurs went extinct. In fact, one very important lineage of dinosaurs, the birds, did not go extinct back in the day. And so birds are true dinosaurs. Do we need to know this for the exam? I see the question. Yes, this is class material. This is a lecture. This will absolutely be on the class exam. You can expect to know, see a phylogeny that looks like this and to know these relationships. Now, I'm going to add a little bit more to this phylogeny. I have here the phylogeny that you're familiar with, our current reptiles, and I added a few other groups. Notice here that mammals is the outgroup to all of these other reptiles. And this is the mammals are the sister taxa to reptiles. And I'm going to add a few more clades of extinct reptiles to this phylogeny. But first, I'm going to take a couple questions. I see 2 hands up, but I don't know whose hand they are. So, oh wait, I got Chase. I do know Chase and McKenna. So Chase, go ahead.
I accidentally left my hand up from the last time, but I do have a question.
Oh, well, that works out well then. Go ahead.
So you said that obviously like this whole lecture is going to be like, we're going to need to know for an exam or quiz or whatever. Are we going to need to know like the exact lineages and all that, like what the phylogeny actually looks like? Because that's a lot compared to what we've previously looked at. So like, because I know the placements of all of them kind of, but I don't know if I can draw that that tree technically.
Yeah, that's a fair question. I'm not going to ask you to draw this whole thing from memory, but you do need to know it and need to know the relationships among these different groups. And specifically these groups that I'm highlighting and these relationships that I'm highlighting is important here. Let's see, McKenna, you're up.
I am having trouble recalling. So why do we exclude crocodilians from dinosaurs?
Oh, that's a great question. So I shouldn't have said it quite that way that they're excluded. It's just that that's a separate lineage. Just in the same way that turtles are a separate lineage from all these archosaurs, crocodilians just don't fit the definition of dinosaur. And there's some very kind of specific and technical reasons why crocodilians are a distinct lineage from dinosaurs. It has to do with their morphology and some other aspects, primarily their morphology. But they're considered a separate lineage from the dinosaurs.
Okay, gotcha. Thank you.
Yep, that's a great question. Yep, thanks. All right, so just because I know you wanted more detail, here's even more detail. Now, I'm going to come back to this phylogeny as I walk through these groups, so don't worry about getting it all right now. But what I want you to note is that I changed the top part of, well, I added a few clades to this phylogeny. Specifically down here, the sister to all of the dinosaurs and the crocodilians. So here we group dinosaurs and crocodilians together. If we take the sister, there's another clade here that's sister to all these guys. That's still an archosaur, but not a dinosaur, and that is Pterosauria. So this is your pterosaurs. This is your pterodactyls, your Quetzalcoatlus, all those guys. They are sister to the group that includes dinosaurs and crocodilians, and then that whole group of archosaurs is sister to turtles. Then notice up here is we have a lineage of extinct reptiles that are sister to squamates and that are indeed lepidosaurs, but they're now extinct called mosasaurs. These were giant, primarily marine reptiles. Then you notice up here, I've got a question mark because we don't really know the evolutionary relationship among these groups, but we did have sister to the lepidosaurs, a group called plesiosaurs that were again, primarily marine swimming reptiles. We have another group called placodonts that were really weird. I'm going to talk about those a little later. And then notice the sister to all of these other reptile groups, the sister to everything else I've talked about so far, except for mammals, of course, because they're still reptiles. This group is still reptiles. And that is your ichthyosaurs. Your ichthyosaurs are dolphin-y looking marine reptiles. And again, I'll show you some examples of that. And those guys are thought to be the most distantly related to all of these other reptile groups. So I'm showing you this overview now. I haven't shown you any cool images yet. I haven't told you any cool stories. Just want to give you the lay of the land so we can map things out. As I talk about each of these groups in more detail, I'll go back to this phylogeny and make sure we're oriented on there. The takeaway message here is that there were many types of prehistoric reptiles, not all of which were dinosaurs. We tend to call it like the age of the dinosaurs, but in fact, there was lots of different prehistoric reptiles. Note that pterosaurs are archosaurs, but although they were large flying reptiles, they are not particularly closely related to birds, and they are not the ancestors of birds. Common misconception. On this phylogeny, there are two groups of dinosaurs, the Ornithischians and the Saurischians. And the Saurischians, let me go back to the phylogeny. Oops, wrong way. Saurischians are the group that includes sauropods, theropods, and birds. Birds being a kind of theropod. So if we group those guys together, that forms a group called the Saurischians. And this other group of dinosaurs is called the Ornithischians. And oops, sorry, I'm getting ahead of myself here. Where am I going? There are within Saurischian, there's two types of Saurischian dinosaurs, theropods and sauropods, as I mentioned, and birds are a highly derived and extant group of theropods. So those are the big takeaways from that phylogeny that I showed you. The other really important thing to think about when we think about these prehistoric reptiles is that these were unearthed for a long time, right? So here we see the Mesozoic era broken into the Triassic, Jurassic, and Cretaceous time periods. So the lower you go here, the further you away are from the present day. So this is millions of years ago. So the extinction of the dinosaurs and ammonites and lots of stuff, what's called the PG boundary, where the meteor hit, and we'll talk about that later, is about 65 million years ago. Just before that, we had the Cretaceous, before that, the Jurassic, before that, the Triassic. And you can see on this timeline here that the dinosaurs have been around from pretty early in the Triassic. Mammals came around in the later Triassic. The first birds were actually in the late Jurassic, et cetera, et cetera. What I want to do is put this on a time scale, though. So Stegosaurus lived around the mid-Jurassic, right? And T-Rex, for example, was alive at the end Cretaceous. The middle Jurassic was, let's say, about 180 million years ago. The Cretaceous ended 65 million years ago. That means that more time on this planet passed between when Stegosaurus was on the planet and when Tyrannosaurus Rex was on the planet than between Tyrannosaurus Rex and today. So we kind of lump all of this stuff in this distant past category, but we need to realize that there was a huge amount of time on which over which these animals basically dominated Earth's ecosystems, and also they had a huge amount of time to evolve and change. And so think about that we are closer in time to Tyrannosaurus Rex than T-Rex was to Stegosaurus. It's a cool kind of thought for meditation. So let's go back now to our blown up phylogeny, including all of these extant and extinct groups. And I want to start off by talking about this group called Pseudosuchia, more commonly as crocodilians. Before I do, I'm gonna build up the anticipation here because I got some cool pictures on the next slide. What questions do you have? I see a couple hands. McKenna and Sid's hands are up. I'm not sure if those are old hands or new hands.
Sorry, I meant to put mine down.
That's okay.
Mine is up. So like, what did you say about pterosaurs? Did you say that they're the outgroup in this phylogeny?
They are the sister taxa to all of, well, they're the sister taxa to the group that includes dinosaurs that you see here and crocodilians. And
okay, because I thought you
really
said something specific about that, but never mind. All right.
Yep. You might be thinking about ichthyosaurs.
Okay.
And we're going to get to those guys in a minute. All right, let's talk about some prehistoric. Crocodilians.
Real quick, there was another hand up.
Oh yeah, sorry, I missed that. Whose hand is up?
Mine. Quickly, I just have a quick question.
Yeah, go for it.
So on the phylogeny, it looks like the extinct species are like further back, set back than the ones that are here today, like the lineages. Is that important that we make that as accurate, or that we?
Yeah, thanks SK for pointing that out. Actually, yes, that is important because it indicates the groups that you're familiar with. So we know that crocodilians, of course, not all of them, but crocodilians as a group still have representative extant species, as do birds, turtles, tuatara, and squamates, and of course mammals. Everything else that's a little bit further back to the left is extinct. Do note that even though what is not accurate on this phylogeny is the length of these branches. So for example, placodonts went extinct way before the mosasaurs, but I have them all kind of in a line here. So you can just think of it as two groups, extinct groups and extant groups. But don't read the length of these lines to indicate exactly when in time these different groups became extinct. Yeah, good question, SK. Thanks for asking that. And let's talk about crocodilians. So the takeaway message here is that back in the day, crocodilians were super diverse, much more diverse than they are now. And by
Dr.
diverse, I
Gangloff.
mean that they had a wider range of sizes and morphologies. They inhabited a broader range of habitats. They had a wider range of diets and lifestyles, et cetera, et cetera. You can see, for example, this guy, Postosuchus, had essentially kind of almost like a theropod-like gait with these large rear legs and smaller front legs, primarily or almost exclusively terrestrial compared to all currently extant crocodilians are primarily aquatic. They do come on land for sure, but they're primarily aquatic. You can also see how dang big they were. This is a Sarcosuchus to scale with about a 6-foot human. And you can see that the rear of the Sarcosuchus itself is about 6 feet tall. These guys just got massively, massively huge. This is a Desmatosuchus here. You can see these kind of big spikes coming off, almost looking like an ankylosaur or something like that. Again, it's walking on 4 legs with this gait, with this high gait. So it's again, primarily terrestrial. Now, I'm not going to ask you to know the names of all of these specific species. I just want to show you some representative species to illustrate the diversity of these groups. Another good example here is the Sarcosuchus. Actually showed this on the previous slide. Another nice image of this guy here. Again, just absolutely massive, massive crocodilians. There's another one called Dinosuchus, which was just huge. And the takeaway message here is that crocodilians are much more diverse. They were much more diverse then than they are now. And they are not dinosaurs. They are crocodilians, even though they lived around the same time. Let me just get this. Oops. And this is a slide to show you the scales of the different prehistoric crocodilians. So we have here Sarcosuchus in red, Dinosuchus in orange, et cetera, down to this blue one here is an alligator, Mississippiensis. This is an American alligator here. So just to give you a sense of the scale, like we think of American alligators as being really big. These guys are absolutely dwarfed by some of these prehistoric species. Let me look in the chat here. Yeah, I would like you to know the Mesozoic era is composed of the Cretaceous, Jurassic, and Triassic time periods. You don't need to know the specific dates of those time periods, but you should know those 3 time periods as well as the fact that they're all part of the Mesozoic, because that's our Age of Reptiles. That's what we're talking about today. So that's the takeaway message for crocs. That's all I'm going to say about crocs. And I think actually, well, I'm going to go through a little more and then I'll pause. We'll take a little stretch break here. We've been sitting for a
Question
while.
before.
Yeah, go ahead, jump in.
Do you want us, similar to the herps of Ohio, know example species from each of these groups, like Sarcosuchus or Dinosuchus?
That's a good question.
Maybe like just
let me come back to you on that. Let me come back to you on that one. I might have. I want to think about how I want to assess this. So let me come back to you that one on that one, Ethan. That's a good question. All right, I'm going to talk next about this group, the pterosaurs. So just to refresh your memory, pterosaurs are in this group of reptiles called archosaurs. That includes all of the dinosaurs and the crocodilians, and now also the pterosaurs. Now meaning at this point in our lecture, not at this point in time. So the pterosaurs were cool. These guys are some of my favorites. They're the big flying dinosaurs. Oh, that was a major slip. Big flying reptiles, not dinosaurs. Sorry, don't know where that came from. That included organisms like the pteranodon. You see they had these big head crests, these really long bills. This guy, the dimorphodon, actually one of the earliest pterosaurs. And you can see how it has its wings kind of fold, so it can actually walk around with quite a great deal of agility on 4 legs, but then it can also extend its wings to kind of glide. These guys weren't terrific flyers. They kind of climbed up in trees and kind of glided down, but that was early in the evolution of the pterosaurs, as I said. There's also probably one of the most amazing creatures ever to live on this planet, the Quetzalcoatlus. This was the largest pterosaur and indeed the largest flying organism in Earth's history. You can see here what this guy looked like in scale compared to a human. And so this is in meters. So this guy from tip of the toes to its snout was 8 meters long, which is like 24 feet long. You can see it absolutely dwarfs this size of a human. These guys, in fact, ate dinosaurs, to give you an idea of how big they were. So they're big old flying reptiles. And we can see some examples here. Here's one eating like a baby sauropod, kind of grazing on the landscape. Recent research has demonstrated how they could actually use the way their legs provide mobility on the land and their wings kind of fold to provide the lift necessary to get their giant bodies off the ground. And you can see in some cases they had these enormous wingspans and also these really elongate heads and bills and long necks, but they had relatively short hind legs there. And so this is a Quetzalcoatlus. These are pterosaurs, not dinosaurs. So the takeaway message of this is that there was a great diversity of pterosaurs, that they were flying reptiles, although, and they were archosaurs, but they were not the ancestors to birds. They evolved on a separate lineage from birds. So true flight has evolved 3 times in the vertebrates. That is, of course, our birds, or at least 3 times, I should say. There's a little bit of controversy about this, but 3 times we can say with certainty: birds, pterosaurs, and anybody know the last one?
Mammals.
Yes, which mammals?
Bats.
Bats, exactly. And Chase, you got your hand up. Go ahead.
So I'm just trying to like think about like the scale. Like they're huge animals. There's like not really an organism that's that big today. So like I'm just trying to like, I don't know if there's like science behind it or if they know anything about it, but like how they were able to evolve that large in comparison to like the reptiles we have today.
Mm-hmm. I mean, the answer to that question is that we don't know for sure, but basically that the environment they were in favored selection for large body size. And there was no limiting factor on that in their environment at the time. And so they were able to evolve large body size because for whatever reason, that increased their fitness in an evolutionary sense. So being bigger maybe made them either survive better, ward off potential predators, or reproduce more successfully. I don't know exactly what that mechanism was, but the way the world was structured back then favored this evolution of this giant body size. What's important to note is it's not just pterosaurs. It was in theropod dinosaurs and sauropod dinosaurs and Ornithischian dinosaurs. All of these different groups, we see these really huge vertebrates that we don't see today as often anyway. But of course, the largest animal that's ever been on the planet is still alive today. And that is an organism that's even larger than any of the dinosaurs that I'll show you here. Do you know what that is?
The blue whale.
Yeah, blue whale. Biggest thing that ever lived on the planet. Biggest animal that ever lived on the planet, I should clarify. See a couple other hands. Again, I don't know if these hands are old or new, so just go ahead and shout out your questions if you got them.
So Chase's question about the giganticism of the animals. I know this is a purely theoretical question, but the fact that the dinosaurs got wiped out was like kind of chance. So like, have they done any research about whether or not they would still be alive potentially if that didn't happen?
That's a great question. I mean, there's no way to speculate on, what evolution can do, right? Like there's no way to know one way or another for sure. We could speculate that we have no reason to believe that, barring this major catastrophic event and a meteor striking the Earth, we have no reason to believe that they would have gone extinct, at least not as quickly and across the board as they did. That one event changed the entire course of evolutionary history on the planet. But we can't know for sure what would have happened if that meteor never struck, right? But
That's terrifying.
If you're asking me, I would say absolutely. I'd see no barring this catastrophe. I mean, they're hugely successful. They would have kept on being successful, most likely anyway, based on, that's just my limited guess, but that's what I would say for sure. Good question, Sid. Yeah, I appreciate that one. Let's see. I got Ethan. I'm not sure if your hand is old or new, and Sam's got a hand up too.
No.
And it just says Sam, so it could be any number of Sams.
I was just wondering if I could make a quick comment about their giganticism, about something I learned actually over the weekend. So I was actually talking with my dad over the weekend, who was listening to a researcher talking about some new work with their giganticism. And I think part of it was enabled due to a better respiratory system than we actually have currently, and respiratory tracts like running through the entire body. and lighter bones due to aerations in the bones as well. So that was a part of why they were able to get so big.
Yeah, that could be part of it for sure. And so these guys, along with modern day birds and some other groups, have these really highly derived respiratory systems that allows for more efficient gas exchange. So we don't want to go too much into that. I don't know if it's true necessarily that these guys had some kind of more efficient system than is available to organisms today, because birds are super efficient. What I can say is that in some other groups of organisms that in the past, the relative proportion of oxygen in the Earth's environment has varied. And at certain points when that oxygen level was higher, it actually permitted very, very large arthropods to exist, like centipedes and dragonflies and stuff like that. That couldn't exist today simply because the way the respiratory system of those organisms are structured, they wouldn't be able to get enough oxygen in today's concentration of about 21% oxygen in our environment. But in the past, when it was closer to 30%, they could get a lot bigger. And it has to do with the tracheal respiratory system of arthropods. We don't need to get into that, but that definitely plays a role in organisms being able to get large. Yep. And Sam, I apologize. It just says Sam, so I don't know which Sam this is.
It's Sam Miller.
Sam Miller. All right. Hit us, Sam Miller.
This is kind of more in response to Sydney's question about what it would be like if dinosaurs didn't go extinct. Obviously, it is just like a speculative thing, but there actually have been a few different projects that kind of explore that idea, which I kind of just wanted to bring up because I think they're really interesting.
Yeah, is this the one about the Troodon?
That was one of them.
Okay, yeah, tell us about these. Yep.
So the one that I was really wanting to share was there's a paleontologist and artist named Dougal Dixon, I think, who one of the books that he released was called The New Dinosaurs, and it's a book about like speculating on what could have happened in the 65 million years after the dinosaurs went extinct if they hadn't gone extinct. Obviously, it's just like a speculative creative exercise, but it's like you can use like understandings of science and evolution to think about that in a very scientific way, even if it's not data-based or anything like that. I would definitely recommend that if anybody's interested in that idea. And then you also mentioned the troodontid one, which is kind of a little bit weirder, but that's also something people need to think about.
Yeah, basically what happened with that is some researchers or somebody, I don't know exactly, they speculated that, so Troodon was a kind of theropod dinosaur that was basically thought to be one of the more intelligent dinosaurs. So they speculated that if dinosaurs if the meteor hadn't hit and these groups continued to evolve, that the Troodons would have evolved like to this kind of higher level of cognitive ability and become like these like uber smart dinosaur creatures that were kind of human-like in a way. Again, like Sam was saying, it's not necessarily based on any fact, but it's based on kind of plausibility. It's fun to speculate, like, okay, what could have happened? And there's no reason to say that this couldn't have happened. But again, we don't have evidence to say that it would have happened for sure. Yeah, that's great. Thanks, Sam, for bringing that up. That's important to think about, is these very creative ways of thinking about what that history could have been. And I think, if I'm not mistaken, the cover slide that I have with the crocodilian jumping out of the water is a Dougal Dixon illustration. But anyway, a couple more hands here, and then let's take a break for a second before we continue. No, we got all the hands. Did we get all the hands?
Here, I've got a quick
Same.
recommendation. It was mentioned like that. I guess I mentioned that what is it by Dougal Dixon? I forgot the name of it, but that it's like speculative work. But if anybody's interested in like speculative paleontology or speculative evolution, there are some really cool works by C.M. Kozman, I think it is. There's a book called All Tomorrows, and there's also a work called All Yesterdays. And it's a really cool piece of work about like directions that evolution or natural selection could have taken things if different environmental circumstances were different. Some of them are about dinosaurs, some of them are about the entire evolutionary track of history. Some of it is very, very cool. So if anybody is interested in that stuff, I would absolutely recommend C.M. Kozman's work.
Can I ask another question really fast?
Mm-hmm. Sure, go ahead, Sid.
Okay, and then thank you so much. That's really freaking cool. So the animals are crazy big. do we know what the population density or size was like for a lot of these guys? Because I feel like there can't be that many of them to be alive at one time, right? Because the competition would be so big, because they just have to have so many resources to sustain the size of them.
Yeah, that's a great question. And for some of these groups, we do know that they had rather large population sizes. We know, for example, some sauropod dinosaurs traveled in herds and things like that. For some others, we have very limited evidence. And so it varies a lot. You know, for some groups, like let's say, for example, Triceratops, we have hundreds and hundreds of skeletons, some of which are more or less complete, that are juveniles and adults and males and females and all this stuff. So we know a lot about them. Other species of reptile have been described from like 2 bones, literally. And so we know a lot less about those other groups. So it varies a lot, but that's actually a huge question, is understanding like not only what these dinosaurs looked like, but their ecology, how they, you know, maybe lived in social groups, how they acquired food, all of this kind of stuff is super important. Oh, I see the rise and fall of dinosaurs. Yeah, that's a good one. Is that Steve Brissett, I think, wrote that one? It's a nice, I read that one recently. It's really good. There's a couple really good popular science books out there on dinosaurs in the past couple years that I definitely recommend. And what's cool, to go back to like this idea of this, like, you know, speculative evolution idea, while we can't, you know, say that any of those things would have happened, what's cool about that, what's really appealing about that idea to me, is it shows you the what's the word I'm looking for? Oh, there was a specific word that I just had on the tip of my brain that left me. But the contingent nature of evolution, that like it could go any number of directions. It's not, you know, evolution is not moving towards organisms with certain characteristics or without certain characteristics. It can just go in any direction depending on just happenstance and contingency on the planet, such as a meteor hitting. And so that's why I think some of those like speculating about that is really interesting, because sure, it could have happened. There is an infinite number of ways evolution could have gone. And that's the really cool thing about it, is that it's not, it doesn't have an endpoint that it's working towards. It just goes where it goes. And that's how the world is, and the organisms on it. And so with that in mind, let's go back to a bunch of cool relationships among evolutionary relationships among groups. We talked a little bit down here about the crocodilians and the pterosaurs. What I want to do next is move on and talk about some dinosaurs. And I'm going to start off by talking about some theropod dinosaurs. But before I do that, we've all been sitting in our chairs for a little bit too long at this point. So I'm going to go and motion that we take a 5-minute stretch break. And then we will come back and get back to this. I'm going to set my timer right now for 5 minutes, take a break. And I do encourage you to get up, move around. Sitting in front of the screen for Zoom too long sucks for everybody. So get up, move around, and I'll see you in 5 minutes. All right, that's a nice 5-minute break. Hope everyone got out and stretched their legs a little bit. Let's get back to it. And I'm going to keep an eye on the time and keep moving through our lecture here. And what we don't get to today, we will pick up on Wednesday, probably, depending on the weather. I'll talk about that a little later. Talk about pterosaurs. All right, let's get in here. I want to talk about this group here of the theropod dinosaurs. But first, I want to get into a little bit of a controversy, a little bit of detail about how dinosaurs are classified. Okay, so you see here that dinosaurs includes 2 major groups. One is called the Saurischians, which you see here, which is the sauropods, the theropods, and modern-day birds. The other group is called the Ornithischians. Now, the reason they are called these 2 names is because of the shape of their pelvis bone. So Saurischian dinosaurs, like this Allosaurus you see here, have a lizard pelvis that is shaped more or less similar to a modern day lizard. So the word saura comes from the word for lizard. Like, for example, the term dinosaur means like thunder lizard. That saur means lizard. Here we have Saurischian, referring to the shape of the pelvis, and meaning that it's lizard-like. The other major clade of dinosaurs is the Ornithischian pelvis, which you see an example here in a Stegosaurus, and because it's shaped more bird-like. So ornitha, like ornithology, means bird. Now, that all sounds good. They classified based on the shape of the pelvis structure, right? That's great. Now, the confusing thing is that birds are actually Saurischian dinosaurs. So you can tell that maybe this isn't the best trait on which to determine which clade or which how to divide the dinosaurs. I'm going to talk a little bit more about why that's controversial and some evidence that that might actually be incorrect. But it's important to know that these are traditionally, and in many ways still currently, the two major groups of dinosaurs, Ornithischians and Saurischians. Let me talk first about a group of Saurischian dinosaurs called the theropods. You're all very familiar with these because T-Rex is a theropod and T-Rex is pretty famous, right? And so theropod dinosaurs include some examples here, the Giganotosaurus, which was similar in many ways to T-Rex, but larger. Oviraptor, which was the smaller theropods. These guys were kind of like ostrich shaped and had similarities to ostriches. And I want to talk about, here's an example. So this is a cool example of dinosaur behavior. And I see a hand up. I'm going to get to that hand in 1 second. I'm going to finish this slide here first. This is actually a fossilized dinosaur nest of something called an oviraptor. And this was found in China some years ago. And researchers found the skeleton, well-preserved skeleton of this oviraptor. You can see, for example, its leg going down to its claws right here. And they found it surrounding all of these eggs. And they said, oh gosh, this dinosaur got killed when it was predating upon this nest. So we're going to call it oviraptor, which raptor means thief and ova means egg. So they literally named this thing the egg thief. And they're like, we got this fossil of this dinosaur robbing another dinosaur's nest of its eggs. Cool. Well, not so. Later evidence and other fossil evidence revealed that that's not what was happening. What was happening here is this was a mama oviraptor sitting on her nest. And so the name oviraptor is definitely a misnomer. They are actually exhibit this maternal care, and the parents will sit on the nest and incubate the eggs, just like modern day birds. And so it's a good example where previous preconceptions about dinosaur behavior and social behavior specifically misguided our interpretation of fossil evidence. Rather than a dinosaur eating the eggs of another individual, this dinosaur is actually nesting and protecting its own nest. So a good example of theropod dinosaur there. The last example I have here is the Therizinosaurus. These guys are cool because contrary to most other theropods, they were actually herbivores. You can see this guy licking some leaves off of a branch with his long tongue. What was crazy about them is they had these super long claws, in some cases up to like 2 meters long. So that's like, a claw as tall as I am on their fingers. And we don't know exactly what they were for. There's speculation that they were used for digging, there's speculation they're used for grabbing branches and things like that. But they had these really, really long claws. Some examples of theropods. Let's see, I have a few more examples here, but let me take questions. I think Sid, was that you with your hand up?
Yeah. For the pelvises, do we have to actually know the shape, like what it looks like? If you gave us a picture of them, we would have to be able to ID that, or is it just that the I'm gonna butcher this, the Ornithischian is the bird pelvis, and then the Saurischian is the lizard pelvis?
Yeah, that's all. I'm not going to ask you to know the shape and to differentiate it anatomically. If you're in my vertebrate anatomy class, we'll get to that. But I don't even think we covered that in vert anatomy. But here I want you to know generally that these two categories are defined by the shape of their pelvis, and that the Saurischians had this lizard-like pelvis and the Ornithischian had the bird-like pelvis.
Okay, awesome. Thank you.
I just want to say that you did cover it in vertebrate anatomy when I had you.
Oh, we did. Okay.
That was a
I
big
couldn't
thing.
remember if we got into the specifics of the pelvis shape or not. Right on, Alan. Oh, that's right, Alan. And I gave a shout to Mason and Michaela before for students that were in vertebrate anatomy, and I neglected to give you a shout out, so I apologize for that. All right, so theropod dinosaurs were often what they're known for is their intelligence, presumably because of some lines of evidence that suggest they're intelligent. So, for example, they had large brain cases that held large brains. Many of them were feathered. And one group of these theropod dinosaurs became highly derived clade that we now know as aves, or birds. And so what is often considered the transition between dinosaurs and birds is the Archaeopteryx. Very famous guy you see here. It's, depending how you look at it, it's either the last dinosaur in this lineage or the first bird in that lineage. But what's really important here to recognize is there's no like start and stop. Like that's a continuous gradation. So this represents a nice transition between what was what goes on to become modern day birds. You see an example of a trove down here. So these guys were like, oh, they were bigger than turkeys. They're probably not quite as tall as you and I, but they were feathered dinosaurs. They actually lived in pretty cold regions. Deinonychus was the big guy. So in the movie Jurassic, what's the first one? Jurassic Park. They're getting chased by the velociraptors. Velociraptors are everywhere. Velociraptors were actually kind of small. They're about the size of turkeys. What those creatures most likely were closest resembled was this Deinonychus, this big old ferocious looking theropod. Notice that they have these crazy toe claws that they can kind of fling forward when they're capturing prey. So it's kind of like on a latch almost. And then when they get to their prey, they can go forward. And these are sizable claws. I mean, each of these claws is like this big. Like these are big old toe claws that you don't want to get stabbed with. So smart and very effective predators, we'll say. Another very famous theropod is the Spinosaurus. And these guys actually are counter examples to a very commonly held premise about dinosaurs, and that is that they didn't live in water. In fact, Spinosaurus were primarily aquatic. They swam around in these kind of shallowish seabeds, and they ate a lot of fish and other aquatic creatures. They had these big sails, and they had this kind of derived morphology for their aquatic lifestyle, including this really long snout. So this is a dinosaur, and this is a theropod dinosaur, which again, remember, is one of the groups of the Saurischian dinosaurs. I also mentioned the Therizinosaurus. Here's another picture of this guy with his long claws. This is a dinosaur, also a theropod dinosaur as well. And just to give you an example of some of the sizes that you'll see, that we often, Tyrannosaurus Rex is held up as like the king of the dinosaurs, blah, blah, blah. But in fact, there's many other species of theropods that are larger. So you see T-Rex in green here. Giganotus was a little bigger. Carcharodontosaurus was even a little bit bigger. And Spinosaurus was even bigger than those guys. And I think currently it's thought that Spinosaurus was the biggest theropod dinosaur, although that is subject to change as new evidence is unearthed, literally here. So Carcharodontosaurus, cool theropod, and Giganotosaurus I mentioned earlier as well. And you can see all of these scale to this puny little person. All right, let me take some questions.
I just had a quick comment about the Spinosaurus thing.
Mm-hmm.
That they actually found within the past year or so, that they actually finally found the back end of one, and they found they actually had a completely specialized paddle tail as well.
Yeah, thanks for bringing it up.
Super derived.
Yeah, so that's great. So they were speculating that they were aquatic, or at least partially, if not primarily aquatic, based on some other lines of evidence, but they didn't have any good evidence, fossil evidence of the tail. And recently, this was in the past years, if not 6 months even, they found evidence that they did have actually like a paddle-shaped tail to facilitate swimming. And so the image that I showed you here predates that discovery. And so the tail is not actually representative of what they did look like. I knew there was another thing that happened recently that's basically solidified Spinosaurus being aquatic. So thanks, Ethan.
Yeah. There's some really beautiful, I think it's National Geographic that did the illustrations of what they believe it looks like now.
With the paddle tail?
Yeah, they have them like swimming in like large rivers and things like that. They're really beautiful illustrations. I recommend anybody look at.
Here, let me,
To
all right.
build on that, there's also fossil evidence now to suggest that their hind legs were actually a lot shorter. So they would actually, walking on land, be a little bit top heavy.
Yeah.
So that's just another little piece of evidence.
Yeah, I'm trying to find a good image here. So I just put up this Searcher, the new Spinosaurus. Let's see what this one is. Yep. I got to update my lecture. I got to update this like weekly. There's so much new evidence that comes out all the time. Oh, I need to be a subscriber to National Geographic. I should just buck up and buy that. Well, anyway, you can get some better illustrations of what they think their tail look like. So here's a good example. You can see this kind of paddle tail right here, right? And so they're definitely aquatic creatures from our fossil evidence. Here's a nice one, actually. Let me blow up this one. You can see the paddle-shaped tail. You can see their kind of smaller forelimbs. You can see how they have this elongate body, conducive to swimming in these shallow seas. Cool stuff. Good. Other questions before we move on? All right, let's go back to our phylogeny that roots all of us. And let's move on and talk about the other group of Saurischian dinosaurs known as the sauropods. These guys were big. These were the biggest land animals ever to roam the earth. And they include things like Apatosaurus, Diplodocus, Amargasaurus, you see here. These guys were smaller. They were like horse, maybe a little bigger than a horse. And they had these cool sails on their neck. You see Diplodocus here. Some of these guys were actually feathered as well, or at least had like a light covering of feathering around them, around their bodies. Brontosaurus would be in this group, Brachiosaurus. So again, these really large herbivorous dinosaurs with these large bodies and these long necks and tails generally. And they are the biggest animal ever to walk on Earth by far. And so you can see for scale what this looks like. So this is the largest sauropod is believed to be, at least right now, is the Argentinosaurus, which is in red here. And you can see some other groups here. This is, what do we got here? We got Diplodocus in green. And I think this is Suprasaurus here in orange. But you can just see these guys are just absolutely astonishingly massive. And that's about all I'm going to say about sauropods. So they're the other group of Saurischian dinosaurs. They were herbivorous, and they had this unique body shape with these long necks and legs, and they were big. They were real big. All right, so going back here, that covers our Saurischian dinosaurs. This is a whirlwind tour, man. Let's talk about the Ornithischians. These guys were cool. They had a variety of body structures, so they're primarily herbivores as well. And we have some examples with these ornate head plates like Styracosaurus you see here. Of course, the famous Triceratops would be in this group. Many other species that had similar kind of head crests and horns. The Kentrosaurus was a relative of the Stegosaurus, and they had these spikes and sails along their back. They also are famous for having these spiky or club-like tails. Kentrosaurus and Ankylosaurus is another one that had one of these. And there's a word for this is called the, I'm blanking on the term for what the tail club is called. There's a specific term for it. What is it? Is it oh, I can't think of the name of it. It was actually, it's a funny story.
Thagomizer.
Thagomizer, yes, that's it. So that actually came from a comic. I believe it was a Far Side comic that he referred to, like he made up a name for this thing called the Thagomizer because it looks like it just destroys things. And researchers like that. And so they ended up incorporating the term. And now that's the technical term for this tail club or spikes is the Thagomizer. Other Ornithischians were more bipedal, or at least kind of they could alternate between bipedalism and quadrupedalism. We get some really kind of unique derived morphologies. We have Pachycephalosaurus, which has this big old skull. And what's cool about these guys is their skull, in places the skull bone was like 6 inches thick, so of just skull. And they would actually headbutt each other in kind of social contests and things like that. Random trivia question: the dinosaur with the longest name is Micropachycephalosaurus. I don't know how many letters it is, but if anyone asks you what dinosaur has the longest name, you'd be like Micropachycephalosaurus. And they'll be like, damn, you know your stuff. You must have taken herpetology. Okay. Iguanodon is another famous one. These guys are actually one of the very first dinosaurs to be described back in the early 19th century. They had these kind of thumb spikes here. Funny story, when they first found the bones for this guy, of course, you find bones in the earth, you don't know exactly how they're arranged. And they thought that this thumb spike here was actually on the forehead. So when they first mounted this guy, they put this thumb spike on his forehead, like a unicorn kind of thing. They were learning. Parasaurolophus is cool. You can see they have these big head crests that were actually filled with air and used to amplify sounds. And they've actually recreated these based on fossil evidence and have blown air into them, trying to simulate and try to imagine what sound they would have created. But it sounds like the super loud trumpet that could be heard for great distances the way, and it can circulate air through there. So it basically acts as like an amplifier or horn. So wild stuff. I mean, just any kind of crazy morphology you can think of, dinosaurs probably had it. And so, oh, that's a sauropod dinosaur. Oh, I put this slide in the wrong place. I meant to put this after the sauropod. So just to back up for 1 second, Argentinosaurus, I mentioned, is the largest of the sauropod dinosaurs. I meant to put this slide back with the sauropods. It's the wrong spot here. You can see how big it was. I mean, you can see a human was basically up to about its knee, just how massive these guys were. But back to Ornithischian. So there's a huge diverse group of Ornithischians. Some were kind of Ankylosaurus-like. Stegosaurus was in this group, and Kentrosaurus is closely related to Stegosaurus. Triceratops and many other species that had these head crests. And then you get these kind of crazy herbivores like Pachycephalosaurus, Iguanodon, Parasaurolophus, Edmontosaurus, Maiasaurus. All of these guys were Ornithischians. And these guys were thought to live in large herds, to have these kind of complex social structures and things like that. So that is, let's see, what do we got here? That's it for sauropod dinosaurs. What questions do you have for me? All right, what I think I'm going to do here then is be smart and not have us all on Zoom for too much longer, because I know it's hard to keep attention spans going on Zoom. What I think I want to do is I might leave it here and get to these last groups either Wednesday or next week, and we'll wrap this up, okay? What I'm going to do instead today is wrap things up with just a few announcements and other assignments and reminders, and then we can go ahead and log off. So save the date. Remember, we're going to try to see mud puppies again. This is actually just a week from Wednesday. We'll take 2 trips, one during class hours, the other in the evening, just like last time. Just like last time, we'll confirm. I actually saw Ryan, the master's student who's doing this research over the weekend, and he said that right now things are good, and knock on wood, that will maintain. So keep that date on your calendar. Also remember that this week we may, no, I have a slide for that. Okay, so here's your comic about prehistoric reptiles for the day. I'll give you a second to digest that one. It's a good one. This is a classic right there. All right, now that you've got that down. So a couple important announcements. Remember, I gave you a primary literature assignment, and that initial survey to pick a paper is due by Wednesday. In addition, you have a few other assignments for Wednesday. So we're going to ramp up. I'm putting a bit more work on your plate this week. And you have a short reading, actually 2 short readings. They're like 2 pages each on play behavior in reptiles, defining play generally. And then you're going to watch 3 videos on YouTube that show reptiles doing funny things. And you're going to think about if you think that's play behavior or not, and complete a short survey kind of explaining why you think what you do. And then we are going to, in class, then we are going to discuss this on Wednesday. Also in your program is a longer paper on the primary literature on reptile cognition that you're going to read for next week, Monday. So you have a whole week to do that. So to be clear, for Wednesday, you have your to select your paper for the primary literature assignment, and then you have these short readings and videos to watch on play behavior for Wednesday. All the details are in your class program as per usual. I will be back to open hours next week, I hope. And just a reminder that if the weather cooperates on Wednesday, we will be going down to the Delaware Run. I actually wanted to do it today, but it's a little not good weather for snakes today anyway. So be ready to go down there Wednesday. If it is nice Wednesday and we do go out, then we'll just pick things up on play behavior and prehistoric reptiles the following Monday. I just want to make sure that when the weather is conducive, we can actually get out and do it. So we're going to be flexible with the timing of the other work we have to do in class. Basically, at this point, we're going to wrap up prehistoric reptiles. We're going to do a short unit, some activities and readings and discussion around cognition and play in reptiles. We got a couple more field trips planned, and then boom, that's it for herpetology, folks. Sad day. I feel like we covered about 1/8 of what I would have loved to cover in this class with everybody, especially with this group. So I'm going to motion that we just kind of continue the class through the summer and into the fall semester, regardless of if you're graduating or not. If you are graduating, you just put off your plans, your life plans for another year or so, and continue with herpetology priorities, right? Anyway, I'm rambling. I'm going to end here a little bit early, but it's a Zoom class. So I want to recognize that it's a little bit harder to stay focused. I will stop the recording here, but I will stay on for a bit. If anyone has any questions or anything like that, I am more than happy to chat. Thanks again to everyone for being flexible and meeting online today. And I look forward to seeing everyone back in action on Wednesday. Ciao.